Welcome to another edition of Office Hours with State Representative John Hampton. I'm John Hampton. I'm delighted to welcome you to another show. I have very special guests today. Fortunately, folks with individuals with disabilities and their families have a stronger voice at the state capitol due to the hard work of Leslie Sabose of ARC Connecticut and my other guests, Faye and Rick Lenz, constituents, residents of Simsbury. And their claim to fame is that they're the parents of Danny Lenz, and we'll get into that shortly. But I wanted to thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you.
To talk about a subject very near and dear to my heart as co-chair of the new Legislative Caucus, first in the nation Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Legislative Caucus that was started last year. And I wanted to educate folks on the importance of these issues and educate them on your history and how you've lived it through your son Danny and how things have evolved since he was born and the successes we've had, but some of the challenges that remain. So I want to, again, thank you for being here. Leslie, I'm going to start with you to talk about the ARC, and a lot of folks don't know what that stands for and what your organization does, so if you could tell us a little bit about your terrific organization, that would be great, and thank you for all your hard work.
Thank you, and thank you for all your hard work, and thanks for
My
having
pleasure.
me here today. The ARC Connecticut doesn't stand for anything anymore. We're just the ARC.
But it used to. What did it stand for?
It did used to, and it used to be called the Association of Retarded Citizens. But many years ago, as we've changed and evolved over the years, language we have found out really matters, and so we don't say the R word anymore. We don't say a lot of the other derogatory terms and definitions that we used to label individuals with intellectual or developmental disabilities, or IDD. So in 2008, the ARC actually officially changed its name to the ARC. We are a 62-year-old advocacy organization that is statewide. We are part of a 3-tier organization. We have a national organization with over 700 chapters. They're based in Washington, D.C. They are very active in federal public policy, Medicaid, Medicare issues, and pretty much anything that has to do on a federal level that pertains to individuals with IDD and their families. And then we have the state ARCs. About 49 states in the country have state ARCs, which is what the ARC Connecticut is, and we're the statewide advocacy, legislative policy, education, outreach organization. And then in Connecticut, we have 18 chapters that are affiliated with the ARC Connecticut and the ARC of the United States. One of our chapters is in Simsbury, or serves the Simsbury area. Farmington Valley. It's called the ARC of Farmington Valley, or FAVAR, and actually that's where Dan Lenz receives his services from, and they're a fantastic organization, like all of our ARCs, and they're very dedicated to very person-centered services and supports for individuals with IDD.
Now, we throw around IDD and we throw around intellectual and developmental disabilities. So for folks at home, define those for us.
Intellectual disability is definitely a term that now everybody is using again as we change our language, because language matters. It used to be the old term mental retardation. That is a actual medical diagnosis. We're moving away from saying the R word, and so intellectual disability takes the place of that of MR. A developmental disability doesn't necessarily have to have an intellectual disability attached to it. So an example might be somebody who is on the autism spectrum, who doesn't necessarily have a cognitive disability. As in Connecticut, they have to have an IQ of 69 or lower. Their IQ could be much higher. They still have developmental issues and need support in functioning and making their way through the daily living skills. So that's what we would call a developmental disability, and that's the difference between the two.
How many are under that umbrella, estimated? The diagnoses of that?
That's a good question. In Connecticut, we know that we have about 3.5 million people in Connecticut.
Really?
Is that what? No, I mean, no. That's our population in
Population,
Connecticut.
but under the umbrella of, could you give an
And
estimate
about
of?
3% is the total. So.
Okay.
Yeah. So 3% of 3.5 million. In Connecticut, the Department of Developmental Services is the agency that has cognizance over the individuals and their families. They have identified about, I don't know, 25,000 folks that are in their system right now or who are waiting to be in their system. We think that number is much higher because that's our folks who DDS has identified, but there are many of individuals and families that haven't gone to DDS to sign up for services.
Now, Rick and Faye, I've known you for a long time Simsbury residents, friends, and you are parents of a frat house. You raised 6 boys.
Yes.
And when Danny was born, how many years ago now?
34.
34. Did the doctors look at you and say your son is retarded? Did they use that terminology?
They did not. When Danny was born, there was no particular evident problem, but as he began to develop, he was much slower in doing certain things, sitting up and that sort of thing, which led us to have some tests which ultimately indicated he had some mental retardation.
They used that term back then.
Do you remember if they used that?
They actually did, to begin
Yeah,
with, use that term, which I would cringe every time
Yeah.
it was used, because Dan was right on the cusp of it, where they were transitioning away from the R word, as Leslie said, and into using the term intellectual disabilities.
The important thing was that he had no specific diagnosis that might give us a clue as to what the expectancy was for his development.
Sure.
But the doctor used the rather devastating conclusion that he thought Danny could possibly neither walk nor talk and would spend his life in a sheltered workshop.
So obviously a very frightening, emotional time, and you probably wondered, where do I go? What from here, right? I mean, you start with the doctors.
We did.
And then where do you go? That was what year? 19.
He was born in 1980.
Right,
Okay.
so that was about 82
Yeah.
Right.
by the time all of the testings came back. Or
Okay.
He was a year and a half roughly, so not quite.
So there was no internet. You can't Google. There's no, where do
No.
you start?
Well, and that's a good point, because ignorance is a lot of the
Yeah.
what makes it so kind of overwhelming.
And scary.
The good news is we had 5 other sons who were extremely needy in terms of just raising the family, so we couldn't just dwell on Danny and worry just about Danny. And as it turned out, having 5 brothers was the best possible thing that could have ever happened to Danny, because they cut him no slack whatsoever.
Sure.
You're the youngest brother, you're going to do what we do. His verbal skills, I think, developed particularly well because of that. And he never looked at himself as being different or disabled or in any way different than anyone else.
We also, he was at UConn, that's where he was diagnosed, medical, and so we were fortunate enough to have some people who talked to us and helped us to understand what was happening, and we actually ended up, I did, going to seminars and workshops and educating myself on what happens when you have a child with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and where do you go, and who helps you to advocate for that child. And very scary, because at that point there weren't a lot of supports around for us.
In a different culture.
In a different culture.
Stigma
And
of it.
yeah, the stigma of it. And so we ended up actually having the Simsbury school system do some testing of Danny, and they took him into the school system under 3 years of age at that point, which nowadays doesn't sound like much, but at that time it was a big, huge thing for them to do, because early intervention was just starting, and so we were able to get him in under the coroner.
And I have to interrupt here to point out just as one example. Danny's life is a series of miracles. His birth was a miracle, but all of his life's development was a miracle. And when Faye was exploring getting him into this program, at that age, he had some extreme behavior problems. At times, you bring him into a store, and he would just lash out and have all
Sure.
kinds of issues. And the day that the teacher came to our house to see Danny, it was like he was a different person. He went to the door, he opened the door, he said, "Come in, Mrs. Goldberg." And he sat quietly while they talked, and when she was leaving, she said, "I'm going to get him into the program."
Really?
So, and I have to give a tremendous amount of credit to my beautiful wife here, who has been such an advocate for Danny right from day one. And you know, I'd go up to work every day, and she'd be there with 6 sons, wondering how she ever got into this.
Yeah.
But she did a remarkable job.
Oh, absolutely.
With Danny.
You both are passionate, tireless advocates. And when did you turn to FAVAR, which is a great organization that I want people to know about? When did you?
We didn't turn to FAVAR until Danny was getting close to transitioning out of the school system.
Okay.
So up until the time he was probably 15 or 16, we were working very closely with the school systems. Inclusion was a new thing, helping us to figure out where would Danny benefit most from inclusion, working with teachers, educating even at that point. And then as he approached the transition time, we started exploring some of the agencies that were out there in terms of where is he going to go. When Dan was 19, we formed that Farmington Valley Transition Academy.
Yeah.
And so great. Dan was one of 4 children who went to that academy. We couldn't buy a school system to help us with that, except for Simsbury and Farmington at the time. Now there's a waiting list to get into that school.
Yeah, I hear great things about it. I'm scheduled to tour it, and I know Simsbury pays into it.
Oh, yes.
Big time, which is great credit to our school system. And it's a bridge, basically, for people between high school and adult life, whether
Right.
that's college or job or...
Yeah, because before that, you would stay in high school till you're 21. So your graduating class would leave the school, and you would still have 2 more years in that high school, which makes no sense at all. Danny watched his 5 brothers go to school, go off to college, and to him, this was his college experience. It was held at the University of Hartford. They tried to integrate those kids with some of the social and other activities at the college. So in his mind, he went to college just like his brothers.
And
Go ahead.
I was going to say, and then we started looking at, as I said, at different agencies, and based on what Dan's needs were and what his skills were, to see where the match would be. And, you know, that included looking at transportation, it included looking at housing, included jobs, employment. I mean, those were the 3 key factors for us, and his social life. And FAVAR had the most to offer us at that point.
One of the scariest things for a parent with a child with IDD is they're in the school system getting tremendous support, in our case with Simsbury, even though Danny was kind of on the cutting edge of a lot of the new approaches to special education, because it used to be kind of a classroom off by itself, and then as Faye said, they went more with inclusion. But as a parent, what you see coming is age 21, when the school falls away, and all of a sudden your child is on their own with you. And, you know, in most cases, there's not going to be additional education. So you're talking about, what do you do for their recreational life, their social life, are they going to work? Or are they going to come home from school and sit in front of a TV 24 hours a day? That's the scary part.
Or are they going to have a job and go through all this wonderful education and then go home and sit again in front of a TV and vegetate and do nothing? And so as parents, you're very, very worried about what is going to happen to our children as they enter the adult arena, and how can we help them. And FAVAR was very instrumental in helping us to accomplish and help Danny accomplish his goals.
Now, Leslie, what do you think is the greatest accomplishment in the last 30 years with the greatest accomplishments and success stories with for folks with IDD?
Hands down, the closure of Mansfield Training School and the creation of the entire community support system that we have in place. Going back to some of what you were saying, 30 years ago, the only option for a family who had a son or daughter with a disability, or say 40 years ago, was you were told by your medical professional to put your child in this institution and forget you ever had them and go have more kids and be done with your life. And that's what families did. And it was groups of families, our families, that got together and said, you know, that's not okay, that's not really what we want to do. But there were no programs. What we have right now, birth to 3, school inclusion. I mean, when I was in high school, kids with disabilities didn't go to school. And then when I was in elementary school, when I was in high school, they finally started coming to school. but they were segregated, in the school system.
Sure.
So, we didn't have any of that. There were no recreation programs, there were no day supports, there were no group homes. It was institutions or nothing. And so when the ARC filed the lawsuit that eventually closed Mansfield Training School, we had to create the whole community provider system, and that included transportation, job creation, all of that. And so I think that is the biggest success that we've had in the last few years, is because without that we'd still not have any of these services. Birth to 3 is a federal program, but the fact that children who now are assessed at a very early age can go and get supports from the time that they're born until they're 3, that didn't exist. That was back in probably 83 or 84 when that finally got implemented.
So is that the first stop for many families who have a child born with a disability, is
right.
the Birth to 3 program?
The pediatrician and the family can work together if the child's not meeting the milestones, if there's any questions about speech or language or mobility, you get turned over to the Birth to 3 program. My daughter was actually turned over to Birth to 3 because she didn't speak. And it's a great program to have, so families are able to identify issues. They may not always get a diagnosis right away, but at least they'll start getting assistance with the skills that the child needs to move forward. And that's a huge, huge piece.
Did you find that your doctor at the time, in the 80s, was well equipped at the time? I mean, not to cast aspersions, it was a different time. And so probably the medical profession probably was kind of scrambling, as opposed to now, right?
Right.
We made progress with, I'm hoping that...
We've made a lot of progress, and it's hard because we still have so much further to go, and I know we're going to talk about challenges later.
Yeah.
But when you do look back over the history of the intellectual and developmental disability movement, it's pretty profound what has been accomplished.
I think also.
And I think that the challenges moving forward, if we're smart, will build on those successes so we can keep moving forward.
I think at the time, our pediatrician pointed us in the right direction. He was watching Dan develop and realizing that he wasn't meeting some of those key development points. And so he directed us to people where we could get the testing done, geneticists and neurologists, and they took over from there. And then it was trying to find support for ourselves as well as parents. Who's out there, who can help us, who went before us, who knows where to go. Special Ed Resource Center was a good support for us to educate ourselves. I think it's very important that parents start at an early age to educate themselves as to what's available for their child, but also look to the future of what are their hopes and dreams for their child, like they would for any child,
Sure.
and where do they go to help them fulfill those dreams for their children.
Now you remind me, Leslie, that when my good family friend's son was born 40 years ago, the only option they said to them was Mansfield Training
I think
School,
there was
but they
less-
decided otherwise. And
less crediting of what intervention, and particularly early intervention, would do to change the path. The medical profession was more kind of, well, you had a child with a severe disability and kind of it's all over almost. That was kind of the impression I got from the specialist, not so much the pediatrician.
If you look at some of the files, I used to work in a group home, and we had a lot of the Mansfield class members who lived in our group home, and we had access to their entire files, and just the language that the doctors would use, they're uneducable. How do you say that? Uneducable, imbecile,
wow.
just those kinds of words
Archaic.
were used
Trainable.
not that long
Trainable.
ago. I mean, really,
Yeah,
really,
scary.
that's not that long ago. And yeah, that you were better off. You just went there and you didn't move. And I mean, and the conditions were horrendous. It was a horrible, horrible situation.
It was, and you're triggering me when you say things trainable, uneducable, because those were the words that were
That they
used.
used.
And when Danny was diagnosed, and the whole idea was almost to hide our children.
Well, did you
and
feel
even
that?
within the school system? Oh yeah.
Did you
Of
feel
course,
that socially
Right.
too? What about the dynamic with your family and friends in the community? Was that traumatic and
It was
almost
scary. I remember walking out of grocery stores with Danny, rigid,
Yep.
and people just looking at
Sure.
me and
The
trying to
stares
bend
and-
him to get him in the car, and
Yeah.
he'd be
Right.
crying and I'd be crying,
Sure.
and it was like, and people are looking like, what have you done to this child? And we hadn't done anything. It was just
Right.
who he was, and it was a lack of education on everyone's part. And then I think for Rick and I, it was like, you know what, this is our child. He's a gift to us.
Sure.
He's a gift to this family, and we are going to do everything for him that we would do for all of our other children. And this is how we're going to do it.
Well, we're going to let folks see a clip in a little bit of Danny to share what an incredible young man he is and tell more about his amazing story. He's a great young man, and I think he's got a great political career.
Thanks to you.
He's a powerful advocate, and
He's a great ambassador, too.
he's a great ambassador,
Because
truly.
He's blessed with interpersonal skills and a personality that attracts people, and so they look beyond his disability immediately because
Yeah.
they just are
That's what it's
attracted.
all about.
Yeah, and they see his ability and his skill level.
Now, Southbury is open still.
Correct.
And I do have folks who I know, and I'm sure you know, that have family members there and have enjoyed their lives there. But it is costly, and there is a movement toward away from that, correct? Because of the cost.
Right. Well,
And
because-
also because of the
Positives
the
of
positives of community living.
Right.
And I want to talk about Danny, and Danny was living with you, and you folks were getting older, as we all do, and wondering, what are we going to do, because you don't live forever, and what will happen to Danny. And I think a lot of parents have the same concern when you're gone, what will happen. And
Well, and even beyond, what's going to happen after us, you realize that your child continuing to live with you inhibits their growth because we can't stop being parents. We keep doing things for them.
sure.
And we never realized till Danny went into the supported apartment complex he's in now, how much we were still doing for him and how much he was capable of doing even more. Now he does those things for himself, and it's remarkable to see. If he were living at home, I'm convinced we would still be doing those things.
How did that happen, the evolution?
You mean going into the supported apartment?
Yeah.
Well, it was 2009,
I
I
think it
guess,
was, yeah.
and Danny had left school. We had put him with Favar for his employment and his recreation
And
the transportation. They would pick him up for his job, and he was doing great with all those things. He was still living at home. He had told us his dream was always to eventually leave home, just like his brothers did. And he seemed to take that very much for granted, that that was going to happen. An opportunity came up in a supported apartment complex in Avon that Favar supported. They had about 6 or 7 clients who were there. And so we said, well, why don't we let him try it for a night and see how it is? And he just loved it. And after about a week, he was ready to move in, move out.
Much to
We
your-
weren't ready,
No,
much to our
you guys were
fear.
We
probably
thought this was going to be a very gradual
Right.
process.
you were probably very stressed out.
We were
Very
very
nervous,
stressed
very
out. A lot
scared.
of sleepless nights,
Mhm.
wondering, did we make the right decision? Is this right for him? Will he be safe? Will he be okay? Will they take care of him the way we take care of him? Will they protect him? And you know what? The focus kept being on, what does Danny want to do? What is Danny's dream? What is he capable of doing? And Favar's staff was very supportive in that time.
And we came to believe they would take as good care of him as
Right.
we did, because we met them and got to know them individually, and we could just see the caring that they had for the clients.
Favar is just a shout out to them. It's a great organization that is such a treasure for the Farmington Valley. We're really
Amen.
lucky to have them, and as evidenced by Danny's story. And now flash forward to where we are today, and you never see him, right? He's got his
No.
own life, and
He deigns to come home and see us once every 3 weekends.
If we're lucky.
So tell me, Danny lives in a supportive housing. I've been there. It's a beautiful
Yeah.
place.
It's
He has a roommate.
He has a roommate, but it is low income and it is inclusive.
Yep.
And that's the big key here. Favor is able to rent X number of they call them apartments, they're really townhouses, but apartments, and the rest are people living, who are, I hate to use the word normal, because it's like the rest of us.
Yes.
I don't even like going there.
Sure.
But, so we know that he is not isolated. If he was in, say, an institution, he'd be isolated from the rest of the community, from being able to grow and being able to reach his potential. We're big at looking at what is Danny capable of doing, and we're not going to put any kind of stopgaps in front of him that doesn't allow him to reach that potential. And so this housing has allowed him to do that. I mean,
What makes it supportive? I know because I've been there, and what
Mhm.
makes it, so there are certain things in place.
There's staff member there all day who works with them on their finances
Yep.
and shopping and getting their laundry done and that sort of thing. And then there's someone on site at night who could be called if there was any kind of emergency or anything like that. But they kind of worked out these procedures over time
Sure.
and set in motion the things that gave us security. For example, Danny has a hearing issue. So
Yes, you
there was
told
a
us that
concern
story.
about fire alarms.
Yeah.
So the staff went in there 2 or 3 nights and put these regular fire alarms and made them go off.
You did.
Danny heard nothing. So then they looked into it and they found another type of alarm that sends out a very bright light in addition to a sound, because he had 2 roommates at that point. And the bright lights immediately woke him up because it was so different from what he was. In fact, he was the first one up of the 3 roommates and said to the roommates, "We've got to get out of here, it's a fire alarm." So they had things like that. They had a situation where a toilet overflowed, kind of an everyday occurrence. So they used it as an educational tool, because
Teachable moment.
the 3 roommates decided to call the mother of the roommate who's lived the furthest away from
New
the
York.
apartment.
We live 10 minutes away, she could
Yeah.
have called us.
Yeah.
So the staff used that to say, here's the number you should call, the custodian's number, or if you can't reach
Sure.
them, you reach our all-night person. So they learn through these different episodes. And,
Well, the tour was great, and they had, their schedules, and they also had help with, I know Favar is very focused on health and wellness, and
Right.
Yes.
not just shopping, but shopping healthy and cooking
Mhm.
healthy, and his roommate, and it was just a wonderful experience that, if that was not in place, I shudder to think of what would happen to the Dannys of the world, that we are making investments in these, blessed lives and their futures, and putting no limits on their potential. And if we don't continue to invest in these lives of value, that we're going to pay dearly later.
Well, I think for us, that's why we're still involved,
Yeah.
because, Danny was given that opportunity, and the model of living that Danny has right now is great for him. I'm not saying it's the right model for everybody, but it's a model, and I think Rick and I feel very strongly that every person has the right to be able to live on their own to the best that they
Sure.
can. And so this is a good way of doing it that works for
That's
him.
a very good educational point. There are going to be people who need 24-hour, 7-day-a-week care, and there's a group home model that provides that much more intensive oversight. But for people like Danny, who are capable of making a lot of decisions on their own and learning how to live more independently, this is an ideal setup, because he has the support he needs, but he's part of the community, and he has his freedom and his independence within the constraints that he's allowed to have, and he just thrives on that.
And the
Now-
expense is less, I'm sorry, it's a lot less expensive
To
than,
the state,
to the
everybody.
state, to everyone, to the
And
state.
it's healthy for him, it's healthy for you, gives you peace of mind. What about the folks, though, as the lenses alluded to, who have more advanced or more limits?
Right.
There are homes or supportive housing for those types of individuals?
Right now, yes, they exist. The funding for it doesn't, but we'll get to that in a sec. I think just sort of going back a little bit, understanding the system has changed dramatically over the years. We went from an institutional model which is very expensive because institutions had to have their own power plant, their own water treatment facility. I mean, they were like mini towns. And so they were very, very expensive. And it was also a model back, again, years and years ago, where we had to care for individuals with disabilities because they could not do for themselves. And as we are progressing as a movement, we're understanding that that institutional model is expensive, and that it's really not necessary. And yes, there's always going to be individuals with very high support needs who are going to need like more 24/7 care or support. However, it is a fallacy. It's like this urban legend that they would only have to be able, that they'd only be able to be supported in a group home or in a very highly regulated setting. I know a number of individuals who have extremely high support needs, can't speak, can't walk, incontinent, can't do any activities of daily living on their own, and they live by themselves in their own apartment, and their parents hire in their own staff, and this woman goes to church and she goes to everywhere. And she's quite happy. So I think we have to get away from the old style of, everybody with IDD goes to an institution, and then we went, everybody with IDD goes to a group home.
Yeah.
And now we need to understand that there can be a lot of different models and support systems out there that families should be able to access that doesn't necessarily require that. And if somebody has a higher support need, yes, a group home might be a good spot for them, but they might be able to live independently. They might be able to live with with a roommate, just like Dan's situation, even though there are higher support needs. So the pendulum is swinging. I think we're getting much, further away from that older system, and I think that we're able, to do that. But what's lacking right now, one of the biggest challenges that we have as a state, is because the institutional model is expensive, and group homes are kind of like mini institutions. They're very expensive, and DDS doesn't have the money. The Department of Developmental Services is the state agency that oversees our folks. They don't have any more money, and so what's happening is when kids are aging out of the school system at 21, they are sitting at home watching Jerry Springer, or if they're lucky enough, they do get some day services, but they're never going to receive out-of-home residential support like Dan, unless there is a complete and total incapacitation of the last caregiver. And that's a very, very sad place to be in this state, because you look at Dan's story, and it's such a success story, and there are hundreds and thousands of other families out there who could have similar success stories, but Connecticut right now doesn't have the money, and we're looking at a very, very bleak budget cycle coming up, so it's going to be difficult.
We made some advances over the last few years, and I earlier mentioned that I co-chair with Senator Bai and Representative Jay Case a growing larger caucus, first in the nation, to really tackle these issues. And through our efforts and your efforts, we're able to get more funding, but it's always a battle that we're back again, and we're actually conceivably losing money and going to take some huge steps backwards, and that is going to have a devastating effect on families like yours. So the IDD caucus, again, is bipartisan. I think we're up to how many members now?
I think 56.
56, and we had Family Action Day last year, our first day, which was how many people? We had
probably over 300 for the first one.
Families, yeah.
And we had families come, and family hearing day.
Testified that day.
Danny testified, and actually this will be a great time to show you Danny in action. So we will now show you an excerpt from Family Day. This was 2014?
2014.
2014, and this will give you a good picture of the wonder and glory of who Danny Lenz is. So take a look.
Thank you. My dad gives a few speeches about me,
And then he's going to speak.
and I get a speak back in of June 2000. I graduated from Farmington Valley Transit Academy back in June 2002, and then I got a job. I work at a warehouse in Davison. It's in Newington and stuff. And then there's like a warehouse there where I do their food stuff. I move their food stuff and everything. And then and I get transportation from work and back from work and stuff.
Who gives you the transportation?
Farmington Valley Arc does.
And what other goal did you have?
And my other goal is I live in a apartment away from my mom and dad.
I'm not sure how to take that, but do you want to tell us about your apartment? Who lives with you?
I have a roommate named Patrick, and then we have staff over there. Take me to my recreation stuff. I do like movies, going to dances and stuff, and then I like
What else do they have?
and they help me with Patrice. She helps us pay my bills and stuff.
So do you like your life?
Yeah, I like my life.
Are you ready to move back with mom and dad?
No. No. Before I pass this microphone to my mom to finish, I want to thank the DVR people and the Farmington Valley Arc to help me with my goals and stuff, and hope make things come true.
Your dreams? Your dreams?
Dreams come true. And also, I want to thank for everybody listening to me today. John Hampton, thanks for having us. We like talking at this stuff. So thank you very much. I return this over to my mom to finish.
So, after seeing Danny and what a joyful person is and what a powerful advocate he is in himself, the life he is now leading, how freeing it is that we are looking at, certainly we're all cognizant of the fact that the state is in difficult financial straits and we all want to make cuts in specific areas, but this area seems to be always a target. And now if we cut, make devastating cuts that are proposed, people like Danny could end up on the street and it just, and then we pay later dearly. And I think we need to get the message out as legislators and unite with folks like you to get the word out. And families, we had this year, we had 300 families showing up and advocating to send the message that we can't balance the budget on the backs of those with disabilities and their families. It's, as my mother would say, penny wise and pound foolish.
And on that note, John, there are many aspects of the Department of Developmental Services budget that could be used more effectively and more efficiently. And so the governor and then the Appropriations Committee later, they don't have to cut the budget. They could close some institutions and redirect those savings back into DDS. And I think that's the real difficult piece here. And as you said before, we all know families whose loved ones live at Southbury, and they're very, very happy there. And we're not at all, suggesting that these families kick their kids out and they live in the streets and they're not going to get any supports. I mean, this is not the way it works. The ARC Connecticut's in an active settlement agreement right now with the state of Connecticut about Southbury Training School, and in 4 years, 46 of the members have moved out successfully. Not a single one asked to go back. They're thriving, they're working, they're doing things that they never thought, very similarly to what the lenses were talking about. These individuals who had many things done for them in the institution, that care model, are now living in the community, being able to do more. People are riding buses, they've never ridden buses. I mean, there's just all these wonderful things that are happening. And in the settlement agreement, it is very clear that the appropriate amount of resources will be allocated for everybody who lives at Southbury to move into the community in a way that will not impact them negatively. They're not going to be just given a apartment in, you know, the north end of Hartford. I mean, we're talking, you know, these are going to be places. And so I think it's just very important to understand that, because we're not pushing folks out. But the cost of, well, what Connecticut bills the Department of Medicaid and Medicare for someone who lives at Southbury Training School is $380,000 a year per person. We have 5 regional centers in Connecticut, state operated, 191 people live there, and the cost is $442,000 a year per person. And we have 300 and something privately operated group homes, and that cost is about $320,000 a year per person. And so that's a lot of money. And so we have a very large percentage of the DDS budget going towards a very small percentage and population of the individuals who are eligible for services. And so there are ways that the administration, OPM, and the legislature can work to try to save money, move individuals into maybe even better situations than they're not, completely safe situations, and we might be able to even redirect savings back into families on the waiting list. And so I really, you know, for legislative priorities, that's certainly going to be ours, is to really ask the administration to work with us on making sure that we put a plan in place to close these institutions by 2020, so that we can reuse those resources, because we know we're going to get cut. We're not asking for more money in a really horrible budget year. We know we're not going to get it. Right. But what we can ask for is to reuse the dollars that are already existing. DDS has a $1.1 billion agency.
And 75, I believe, % of that is utilized in some of that budget for 25% of our clients or population.
Right, and those are those
which
in those expensive
right.
publicly operated.
Did we mention the number of people on the waiting list?
Yeah, I was going to ask that.
2,000.
Talk about the waiting list.
Yeah, there's two lists. So just to be fair, it's called the DDS residential waiting list, and then there's a planning list. Combined lists is about 2,000 people. 2,005 was the last number, and that's important because these are folks, who have self-identified as, I'm going to need a home for my son or daughter to live when I can't take care of them anymore. And there are folks who have been identified as needing an out-of-home residential placement for their son or daughter within a year, and it's called a Priority 1 placement, and they've been a Priority 1 for 8, 9, 10 years. And there's just no money, and DDS is saying there is no money. Last year, thanks to the wonderful work of the Caucus and John and Jay Case and Best Buy, was the first time that money was allocated for the waiting list, $4.4 million, in over 20 years for the residential waiting list without a lawsuit. That's huge. It was absolutely huge. And so we really, really thank John and Jay and Beth and all the other members of the caucus. And that was really my hope with my idea of creating this caucus, is to get a handful of legislative champions who will really look out for our issues, for our sons and daughters, and for our families, and for providers and workers too.
Go ahead.
We're just going to emphasize, 2,000 people on a waiting list, and you mentioned some of them have been Priority 1 for years and years and years. Even if you get reached on the waiting list, and it's going to be a matter of medical emergency or death, and think about what that means for the client. He's been living in one place his entire life. Now his parents are gone, and all of a sudden you're transported somewhere else in the state that you have no connection with whatsoever. You contrast that with Daniel, who's in Avon, which is adjacent to the community he grew up in. He's with people he knows and loves who are familiar to him. So that whole transition was seamless for him. But imagine how dramatic that would be in your 40 or 50-year-old person. All of a sudden you've located someplace you've never been before with a bunch of people you've never been.
Very traumatic.
And Dan's been allowed to be a viable part of the community.
Now, talk about his typical day. He works.
He
right?
works, he gets up, he takes his showers, he gets dressed, he makes his lunch the night before, he gets picked up,
I don't
he
even
works.
make my lunch the night
Well,
before.
he makes his because he loves routine.
Yeah.
So I wish I had the
Yeah.
routine that he does. And
There's a staff person to help him a little with his shaving.
right, because he has a developmental disability, so they come in for about 15 minutes, make sure the shirt's tucked in,
Yeah.
the teeth are brushed, and although he does the teeth fine. He goes to work.
Where does he work?
He works at Davidson in Newington.
It's a food warehouse.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a food processing warehouse. And then he comes back, he comes home, and then he does whatever chores that
Yeah.
need to be done that day. Or if
Laundry.
he has laundry to do, he does that. He checks in once a week to make sure his finances are in good shape. And then he pays his bills with their help. And then he has social events, like right now, Fava has a theater group, an inclusive
Yeah.
theater group.
Yeah.
So he's involved with that, so he'll go to that one day a week. He goes to floor hockey another day a week.
Do you ever
has
see,
gone
does
to
he come home for the
wrestling.
holidays? Does
Our
he have a
kid-
secretary? And-
Our kid said to us one day, why isn't Dan with us more? And we were like, because he has a life
He's
like the
busier
rest
than
of
all
you.
of us.
Like the rest of you. But my heart aches, I have to tell you, when I see these families on Family Day get up and share about their fear of what is
Sure.
going to happen to their children. And I think, how blessed are we
Yep.
for Dan to have the life that he has, and how unfair for these new families coming along, or families who are in their 70s or late 60s and looking and saying, what am I going to do? What's going to happen to my child? What a terrible, terrible thing for them to have to live with. When we have money within the DDS budget, if we were creative about how we utilize it and spend it, we could service so many more people on that waiting list.
And that speaks to another priority in our caucus, is having a plan for the next 5-10 years. We can't go through every year to year that it's back to crisis mode and we're out of money, and that speaks to us as legislators and all of us in public service to step up and let's we have a transportation plan, we have plans for everything, but we need a plan for those with disabilities and their families, and we can't just every cycle use them as a
way to cut.
A way to cut. So here we are in 2015 session, and we are mobilized, and IDD Caucus extends across the state, and you are an army of families, which is great, as evidenced by Family Hearing Day. And it doesn't stop there. As you know, I know we're doing educational seminars and having things in the community. We're doing shows like this. We're spreading the message to our leadership, to the governor, that it's not acceptable, or that we do appreciate where we are fiscally, but that we can solve this problem, and we do need to address the fiscal problem, but we can't do it for those to affect those with disabilities. We simply can't, and that's why the caucus is so important.
I think
and we have a lot of work to do.
We do, and I think, we all know this isn't going to happen overnight, but we don't want to step backwards. We want to keep moving in a positive and a constructive way. And I think the fact that, the present budget we're being asked to take another 26% cut.
It's brutal.
For DDS is brutal. It's more than any other agency is being asked to do. And I guess for me right now, this is a civil rights issue.
Sure.
And this is a justice issue. Our children are vulnerable, some of them more than others. And it's up to all of us to speak for those who can't speak. Some of our kids, like Dan, speak very well and and can fight their own battles, but there's a lot who can't. And so I think for us, it's getting the message out there to yes, to families who have the kids with disabilities, but also to the broader community. There is a way to solve this, and the caucus, thank you,
Sure.
is helping us to look at those different options in different ways moving forward.
Well, it's an issue of right and wrong and basic way we act as a nation and as a state. I think people will look at us as a nation, and hopefully we'll be a shining example of how we treat those. You know, we talked earlier, we've made great strides, but how devastating and really, frankly, embarrassing as a nation and as a state if we take steps backward and don't stand up for the Dannys of the world who add so much value. And we're a society of rights and opportunities, but we need to afford those rights and opportunities to Danny to have that same fulfillment.
I think that's why Faye and I are still so both involved in this
Sure.
issue. It would be very easy for us to say, well, Danny's all set, so
No.
let's go vacation in Florida or something. But and let's face it, we're very torn when we hear families who have not been as fortunate. I almost feel guilty by comparison. So we're investing as much of our own time as we can in this cause. We're both on the board of the Farmington Valley Arc, so we're trying to give time to that, but also in advocacy and working with the caucus and with the ARC. That's one of the reasons we're so committed to this, and we're very grateful for what you've done.
Oh, no, it's you who have just made it a personal issue for me, and I know for Jay and Beth, and the issue is just so, as you said, Faye, it is the civil rights issue of our day, and to know Danny and for folks to meet Danny and all the Dannys of the world, it is just so incredibly vital. Now, what advice would you give to the family that tomorrow morning gives birth to a child with a disability? What's the first piece of advice that you would give them in this journey? Now, 30 years later.
30 years
plus,
later,
yeah.
I would say you're not in the tub alone. That there are people out there, there are other families out there. We're here, the ARC is
Yeah.
here. Look for your support group. Look for the people in your community who will help you to know where to go and what to do. You know, talk at a very young age to the birth to 3. Get in touch with them. Learn what you can do for your child. But I think the most important thing I would say is don't wait till your child gets to be 21. You need to get involved, not immediately after your child is born, but fairly soon. You need to educate yourself and your family and get involved with what is going to happen to your child beyond school, and how can you be involved in this movement. How can you be supportive of the caucus? How can you be supportive of the families to families who are trying very hard to make this right for the children who are coming along, for our present population and the ones who are coming
The
along.
one thing I would add, I think that's right, is never lose your sense of hope about your child's capabilities. Don't listen to anyone try and sell short what your child can do,
Yeah,
because
good point.
intervention in so many ways can make such a huge difference. I remember when Danny was in high school, let's face it, they were just starting inclusion in classes, and we were never jumping up and down insisting that Danny be allowed to go to every mainstream class. For him to sit in a chemistry class or physics would make no sense at all. But he took a history class, and he has great memory skills. That's one of the reasons people love him, because he remembers your name. If he saw you 5 years ago, he would go up to you and say, "Hi, Mr. Hampton, how are you?" And people like to be recognized. Anyway, in this class, we worked with him on a project to do a whole thing on American presidents.
Sure.
I went to the class. He stood up with a board with the presidents on. He went through every president by memory of what they had done and how they had done it, and he blew his classroom away. He did a much better job than half of the kids who got up there
Sure.
who were only half prepared,
Yeah.
because it capitalized on his skills. So identify what your child's strengths are and work with those strengths, and they're going to be relatively more independent because of that.
Well, it's no different than all of us.
I was
You
just
know,
gonna
we
say
all,
that.
our parents did that, and for ourselves, and nurture their strengths and talents, and that's what it's about.
I think it's, if you, and you're right, John, I think if you look at it and say, as your child gets older, what are your child's strengths? What are their challenges? What are your hopes?
Mine are still looking for mine. You know, they're just like, you know, they're just.
Yeah, well, some of ours we're still looking too.
Yeah, they're.
What are their hopes? What are their
Yeah,
dreams?
absolutely.
And if you keep that in mind as you move along at every phase of your child's life, you're right. It's just like all your other children. You know, what are they capable of doing? I used to go to PPTs and say to the teachers
What are
every
those?
year,
Tell people about.
oh, they're individual planning sessions or team meetings that you have for your child who has a disability, and the teachers and maybe the school psychologist and head of special ed, and you go in and you talk about what your child has accomplished that year or what their challenges are going to be. But my first question was always, can we go around the room and everyone tell me one positive thing they know about my child?
That's great.
And it was like, I think Rick's right. We look for the hope and we look for the ability that Danny has, and that was always our focus and always is our focus.
Let's drop the diss.
Let's drop
Focus
the
on-
diss. Let's look
drop
at
the diss. Focus on-
recognizing that we all have limitations, but what
Yeah.
is he capable of, and how do we help him to
Yeah,
accomplish
fulfill
that?
those.
And sometimes he helps us tremendously.
Oh, yeah.
Over the years, he has made us.
He's a gift.
He's a gift. A lot
He is.
less judgmental of people, a lot more accepting, and looking more for what people are really good at.
He's amazing. And you mentioned advocacy earlier, and I think that word scares folks, but I think sometimes advocacy, because families, of course, are busy. They're
Yes.
taking care of their families. But advocacy means just simply sometimes writing an email to their legislator or showing up for Family Hearing Day or write letters. And I encourage phone calls, that reach out, whether you live in Simsbury or elsewhere, to your senators and representatives and just say, you know, I am an IDD family member and I vote. Remember the old bumper stickers?
Yes.
And you know, Woody Allen used to say 80% of life is showing up. And I want people to know that the IDD family has shown up in great strength due to your efforts and yours, and your voice is so strong and loud, and people are listening and taking note. However, we have some challenges in the weeks and months ahead, early here in the session, that we are going to mount a movement. Well, we have a movement, and that is going to build up steam, and we're going to make good and right decisions on behalf of those with disabilities and their families. So to those out there who might want information on FAVAR, we're going to put up the link to FAVAR. We're going to put up the link to ARC, because I know you guys have a great website, correct? And for people who want more information, or like I said, for families that wake up tomorrow with a child with a disability and just don't know where to turn.
You could put our email up.
Sure, your email.
There you
is,
go. So, because we
But
know
I
families.
also hope non-IDD families will get
Yes.
inspired by this. You mentioned right at the beginning of this session that this was to educate.
Yep.
And what I found is, as I moved through our community and talked to people about this issue, had no connection with it at all, their eyes are open and they say, I never realized this
Correct.
was going on.
Yes.
And they get excited about it and they want to help. So I would encourage anyone who wants to call their legislator or governor on the behalf of the IDD
Absolutely.
community.
It's
please
all
do
of
that.
our issue. It's
It
not.
is.
It's not limited to your families, and that's why I asked you to explain what PPT is
Right.
in words. I learn every day, and there's never a dumb question to ask about any issue, but especially this issue. I've been so educated on.
It's actually planning and placement team meeting.
Okay.
So I gave them
Well,
all
and-
for an individual education.
We need a-
The IEP, but
We need a
PPT.
glossary,
Yeah,
a glossary.
We do.
We have one. I have acronyms, a list of
All right,
acronyms on our
I'm
site.
gonna need
so.
that.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you for all that you do. Thank you for giving us Danny, and for your advocacy efforts, and to FAVAR and to ARC, Leslie Simoes, and your colleague, wonderful colleague, Shannon Iacovino. And I want to thank Senator Bai and Representative Case and the entire IDD caucus. And I want people to know that we are thousands and thousands strong, and that I will continue to fight the good fight with you, and you're not alone. And I want to thank everyone for joining us for this very special episode of Office Hours with State Representative John Hampton, and we will see you the next time. And thank you so much to SCTV for filming all of these programs, and we'll see you another time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
for all
much.
you do.
Thank you,
Thank
John.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.